So we're going to go ahead and, continue on with this. We want to So I'm going to go ahead and try to get some of the gradation in the sky. I'm using, again, the hard pencil, charcoal, and we want to remember that this has to be dark enough that this looks light. So even though the blue sky is lighter there, it's all about that context. And we want to, we want to be able to get that the value so that we can create the illusions in this sky. And again, it's all about value. Whenever we do anything, it's all about what's the value, what's the shape. What's the value, what's the shape. So we're just going to, again, we have to start bringing this down. Get this to start to look right. I'm going to see if I can, maybe we'll use a little bit of this guy in here. The reason I'd use this, again, it's a little bit easier for lighter tones. I don't want that sky to go too dark. It's a balance. Dark enough, but not too dark. And the hardest part sometimes with dealing with color is seeing the appropriate values, because we're so distracted by the intensity of what's happening in the sky. And so if that's an issue, you can always try to take this picture, the link or what have you. You either do a screen capture and pull it into Photoshop or something and drop out the color. You could also take a picture with your phone. You will get some of the pixels, and the screen that the pixels are laid out on the screen. It'll look like sort of like a grid or something. So there's a term for that. Is it moire? It's been a long time, so I use that term. But it will allow you to see the value much more accurately, which for something like this, of course, is going to be a game changer. If you need to do something to perform better, don't be afraid to do it. There's no reason not to. So again, I'm using this vine charcoal again, because vine charcoal is really great for light tones. And what are we working in? Sort of a lighter tone. I can always make it a little darker, but I'm trying to see what I can do to build this up a little bit. I think I'm going to use the cloth versus because again, the stump will make it darker, and right now I want to err on the side of being a little more gentle with this, building it up, and being just cautious, and that's what we, pardon me. Now, we don't want to just, one thing about charcoal is once it goes too dark, you can't erase charcoal past a certain point. So I'm just using a little bit of caution as I'm doing this. That's how you're gonna. Usually, when we get going on something like this, we just want to jump right in and blow right on through very, very quickly. And I understand the inclination, but you got to hold back a little bit. You got to be cautious with this charcoal, or it will come back to haunt you, so to speak. You'll wish you had been. So that's something to keep in mind. Again, this is the hard. Now, if you have medium and if you have extra soft and all that good stuff. Well, that's great. You know, I just grabbed my pencils that I had. You know, I've got extra soft kicking around the studio somewhere, and it'll just give you a little bit more control. You know, I've got hard and I've got soft. I don't have medium. I don't have extra soft with me that I'm using. But if you do, well, then again, when you get to that point where you're ready to really knock in some nice deep darks, that's how you're going to do it. We're just going to go ahead and put this value in, try our very best to get this to do what we want. Sometimes it can seem trying to control your drawing is like trying to control a toddler, but anyways, for all those who've had toddlers, they know, you know what I mean. But you know, it's patience. You know, patience is the name of the game. Patience is the key. Patience is what will get you there. And so we have to build this up slowly. Again, sometimes that's the hardest thing, is to have that patience to have the drawing, you know, to not make the drawing, but to coax the drawing, because, you know, that's what you're doing. You're going to try to coax this into doing what we want. We're not going to be able to force it. We could try to force it, but that's a losing game, as far most times. Like I said, I've done drawings where, you know, I got out the Brillo pads and the orbital sanders and the sandpaper and, you know, you name it. There have been times where I've cut things and peeled them back to different layers of paper and, you know, really been aggressive, but you have to do that everywhere. Make it seem like that was what you were trying to do. And when I was younger, I used to really get excited about that, because that was, you know, I wanted to show the viewer the struggle. I wanted to show the viewer an insight into creating the image, all that angsty sort of stuff that, you know, as a young artist, that really attracted and fascinated me, with the way to make an image, and how it can sometimes be quite there's no better term for it really than struggle. And well, I don't, it's not, although I can still do that, it doesn't excite me near as much as it used to. Perhaps I have mellowed after all. But, you know, I can still do it when I want to, but there has to be a reason. As opposed to every drawing being a struggle, and every drawing being a war, and every drawing being a, you know, I wanted a little bit more. It seemed like the same song playing over and over again, you know. Obviously different images, but same battle cries or something like that. So I'd like to think these days that I have a little bit more sophistication or something like that. You know, self-deception. Just depends on who you talk to. But to be able to do images that are quiet, images that are soft, images that are elegant, images that are, so not just images that are, you know, like a battle cry or something like that. And at least that's what I tell myself. We all got to tell ourselves something. So I'm going to start to put in some of the, we want to start to put in some of the land. Now the land is in shadow, and it goes back and gets lighter as it goes back. Not sure what that is. Something on my paper there. And it looks like it's embedded into the paper. Sometimes you'll get weird stuff like that happening. Yeah, that's in the paper. That's not coming out. That's what I get for not looking at the paper more closely. So again, if this was going to be for a show or something, first thing you're going to want to do is inspect the paper. Make sure it doesn't have any flaws. Something that fundamental can really, you know, like right now, that would really, I mean, I could work with that thing if I had to, but sometimes you can. Sometimes you're like, oh man, and it just, like, back to the drawing board, get to restart the whole thing. And, you know, I'm not against restarting if I have to, but I certainly don't want to do it if I don't have to. So, and something just as fundamental as paying attention can be all the difference, you know, in getting just a better image. That would certainly be a time when that would have helped, you know, give the paper a really good going over. You know, same thing with, especially with graphite, you want to really check your paper with that, because I've talked about how, you know, if you touch your paper without having cleaned your hands, and there's oils on your hand and things, and the graphite, you know, will stick to the oils of your hand. It's how they collect fingerprints, is they dust with graphite. It loves the oils of your hand. And if you're not careful, you'll end up with this drawing that has all these fingerprints that start to appear as you, later on, as you start to really try to develop the drawing. And there's nothing, well, there's few things, I guess, nothing is the wrong term, but there's fewer things that are more nerve-wracking than to spend 40 hours on a drawing and all of a sudden fingerprints start to appear on the drawing. Because there's no getting that out. There's no, oh, I can work with it. Nope, it'll always look dirty at that point. So the only shot you got is to, at that point, is to, you know, redo the drawing. That's the part that you're like, oh man. So a lot of people that you know, artists and illustrators, they'll take really good care of that paper. They'll wrap it up and just keep, you know, really respect that surface if you're working in graphite, so that you don't have that happen. It's very frustrating if it does, because there's a lot of work that you're going to have to do. Again, you know, there's no, once that happens, there's no salvaging the paper. There's no getting those oils out. So that's something to be aware of as you're drawing. If you're really enamored with graphite, you got to really make sure that you take extra care that the paper isn't compromised with fingerprints. And again, unless it's smudged or something, or your finger had some sort of pigment on it so you could actually tell, you won't know. You'll just be cooking along and putting some value on, and then as it gets dark, the values go darker and darker, all of a sudden the fingerprints will start to appear. And that's why, you know, I refer sometimes to graphite as the high maintenance medium of the art world, because, you know, again, once it's there, it's there. There's no getting it out. You know, it's game over. Now, we're not going to sit here and get way too far into this, into these hills and such, because it's really, you know, this isn't about a landscape. We don't want to sit here. I just want enough to be able for the eye to go, okay, I think that's probably mountains or hills or something. I just want enough to be able to identify what those back shapes are in this landscape. So again, because we're not here to render this, at least the landscape. We're really trying to make this a skyscape, and and we're also trying to make this so this isn't a 16-hour video. We certainly don't want that. So I might do one of those one of these days, but man, people would have one heck of a time watching that thing, I know. But even with these long videos, again, I understand that they are long. You're probably going to have to watch them in sessions, short sessions or something like, maybe a half hour, maybe an hour. But the great thing is you can sit down. They are real time. You can work along, with your materials and try to make an image. That's the fun stuff. The other thing is for those, and if you're in the class, you may have heard this. If you haven't, you should have. So that means I haven't done my job. But if you haven't, but I'll tell people a lot of times that this sort of drawing idea is where you're basically going along with an artist, and the artist is making all the decisions, and you're just sort of going through the motions and trying to record the same decisions that he's making. In terms of draw by number or paint by number classes. And what I mean by that is that you're doing very little of the, not that you're not doing anything, but you are doing very little in terms of all the choices, because every mark I make has a choice behind it. So when you're making images, you can have drawings that have literally tens of thousands of decisions in that drawing. And if you're not used to making those decisions on your own, you're not going to learn how to make a drawing. And I've had students come to me that have been taking classes where they've been essentially painting what other people paint as long as 10 years, and they say, I don't know why I can't sit down and do a painting on my own. I still can't do that. Why is that? And to me, the answer is very simple. I just tell them, you never learned to paint. And they look at me like, oh, what do you mean? I've been painting. I've been painting. Well, what are you talking about? I'm like, nope, you haven't been going through the process. If you got, a painting, again, a painting can have, because you're dealing with color, it can have hundreds of thousands of decisions. If you're not used to sitting down and making those decisions yourself, making your game plan, figuring out the structure, figuring out the shapes, figuring out the drawing, figuring out the perspective, figuring out the colors, figuring out the composition, if you're not used to doing that, it will be like someone who's watched videos on skipping rope for 10 years but never actually picked up a jump rope. And I know some people probably would hear that analogy and go, what do you, that's ridiculous. Who would do that? Well, it's the very same thing. If someone had never picked up a rope and started trying to move their feet while they're swinging the rope, they're never going to learn how to jump rope. They can watch videos all day long. If you're someone who's watching, I think we talked about the water skiing. Let's use a water skiing analogy. If I've watched videos of people water skiing for 10 years, but I've actually never slapped the skis on my feet and actually jumped out of a boat and tried to let that boat pull me around the river, I'm not going to know how to water ski. And it's the same thing with the drawing and the painting process. So you have to, as an artist, you have to learn how to go and how to make and how to create and how to make the decisions and how to make the plan for any sort of drawing or painting, even a simple drawing or painting. And again, these classes where all those decisions have been made for you, it's someone else that's made that decision, and you're kind of present, but you're not there, in charge. You're not the one who's making the decisions. You're just having someone else make the decisions for you. Again, you're not learning. It would be like being in a language class. And if you're in the language class and someone said, look, you know, we're not going to worry about conjugation, we're not going to worry about vocabulary, we're not going to worry about sentence structure, we're not going to worry, you know, about learning the language in sort of a, you know, classical way where you learn about, you know, punctuation, conjugation, you know, these different things, how they construct sentences, the vocabulary, how they conjugate the verbs and things like that. If someone said, instead, I'm going to just start writing stuff on the board and you're going to copy stuff that I'm writing on the board, and by copying this stuff, you are going to magically learn how to speak and understand and articulate yourself in a foreign language. Do yourself a favor, and if you ever got a class like that, get up out of your seat and walk out of that class, because you're not going to learn a thing. You wouldn't learn anything that way. That's a silly, just learning phrases. I remember some people would take in high school something that they had conversational Spanish, because I was raised in the Southwest, and you know, a lot of people speak Spanish in the Southwest. It's a bordering state, so it makes all kinds of sense. And they would learn phrases in that class. They really wouldn't learn, again, all the things I talked about. They would just learn stuff like, you know, where is the library, or, you know, where is, you know, or, you know, where's the bathroom, or, you know, these little phrases. And I don't know anyone out of the conversational Spanish class that learned to speak Spanish, you know, that even remembered the phrases. And then we had other classes that were actually Spanish 1, Spanish 2, you know, advanced Spanish classes and so forth and so on. And those were the classes where you learned a language the way you're supposed to. You learn it through what the words mean. You learn it through how the words are used. You learn it through how the words are put together to form sentences and coherent, you know, conversations. And people in those classes learned how to speak Spanish. And it's no, of course they learned. They're actually learning the proper way that you learn a language. They weren't learning just some cute little, you know, things that some tourist might need to say, but then they don't even remember what those are because they don't have the context. They don't have, you know, the learning of what it means and how to use it and why it means that, and you know, what if they answer and you don't understand the answer? Well, then you're in all kinds of trouble, right? If someone's told you where the bathroom is, but you don't understand the language, good luck, you know. And so that's, you know, we just want to make sure that we want to learn how to draw. And how do you do that? Well, you take good classes. You take classes where, I guess back to those, so I had people, I've never been able to do that for 10 years. And they'll take a beginning painting class from me, just one class. And we'll talk about how we make a painting. We'll talk about, here's this process, there's this process, here's this decision, here's that decision, here's how to control the paint, here's how to identify value, here's how to mix and identify color, here's how to, you know, we go through the whole process. And I've had people that, again, take that class, and it's because of the fact they've learned. Now, they're not like going to be painting, you know, something you're going to see in the National Gallery, but they can sit down and go, yeah, I can now paint an orange on my own without someone trying to tell me how to do it. I can now paint an apple on my own without someone telling me how to do it. I can look at a color, break that color down, know how to mix it without someone telling me how to do it. They suddenly become artists, you know, that they're the ones making the decisions, not the painting making or the not knowing, and so you're not in control. And so that's what I mean by when I say that, with the painting making the decisions, which usually means you're going to end up with a mess, and that's what usually happens, and people get frustrated and they don't know why. But again, once you start learning about value and color and, you know, relationships and all these different things, a whole world opens up, and you step into it, and suddenly you're like, yeah, okay, I can take that rope, I can skip my feet, yeah, I can pick up that brush, I know the I can make some marks, I know how to control the, you know, the basic, what's the word I'm looking for? How to blend, blend the color, work the color. I know all these different things, these basic skills, and now I can make a basic painting, as opposed to I don't understand any of the skills and therefore I can't do anything. If everyone's always telling you how to mix a precise color, you've never actually learned how to mix colors. And why would you think you'd be able to know how to just intuitively do that? And so that's the difference between the classes. Again, this is what we're doing with this. We're making the decisions. Now, I need some of these trees in here to give us the nice darks. And I haven't gone to the soft yet. I'm still using my hard pencil for most of this. I think I've picked up the soft pencil once, maybe twice, this whole drawing. I'm just holding off on making it get too dark too quickly. So I don't want that. That would be a mistake, because it's easier to get it out of control. Because again, once I've gone made it a certain value, I can't erase it. There's no getting the paper back. And then so I'm sneaking up on it. That's my strategy on this. We're gonna slowly sneak up on the drawing. What I mean by that is I'm gonna make cautiously make my values, and then darken them and darken them and darken them. That will be a much easier process without the downside of losing control over the drawing. We don't want to lose control over the drawing. Those are the bigger trees, and then we've got some smaller trees back here. Right, okay, so there's a little bit bigger tree here, bigger clump, and there's another, tree here, and this bigger quote-unquote clump. So we've got that. And we've got these further back. They're a little further back, so this line is in front of this one because these are further back. All right, sorry about that. We had getting used to this new equipment, so the battery ran out. So I kind of clipped a little bit of what I was talking about, a little bit of my conversation. But basically, so we put some trees in here to give, again, some of these distant little trees and things. Some of these actually need to be a little smaller, like this back here is a little too big. Now, does it have to be exactly like that? No, but this is commanding way too much attention in the wrong place. So we're going to bring those down a little bit. And again, I'm not worried a ton about all the different nuances. So we're not going to sit here and worry a lot about the trees and the hills to just in a general sense, not. So we're not going to we're not going to get out of control with it. I'm going to soften some of this because, again, I can't really, the texture is getting in the way of me being able to enjoy the drawing a little bit. And so we're going to go ahead and put some of that texture away, or get rid of some of the texture. Put it away is not the term, but to get rid of some of it. And there's these clouds that are kind of casting shadows on the tops of the hills, and I got to be careful that they don't seem like they're like cartoons, with the hills being defined by sort of these cartoon lines. So there's going to be a part where that line, which is just is caused by the shadow, disappears and peels back. And that's going to be very important to creating the illusion of the fact that right now it looks like a cartoon. And that's because we haven't explained why is this edge on the top of those hills. If light is crawling up there, there's the light. It should be, light on the top of those. But the reason it's not is because, again, we've got these. We have this the shadow of the clouds we haven't put in yet. That's going to start to explain that. And maybe we'll do that right now. Maybe we'll let's see if I can. I want to keep this really soft because there's rain pouring down out of this cloud. And I can use the brush to bring in some of those strokes. You know, sort of these downward of the rain falling from that sky. Again, it's very easy with a brush to bring some of that, to create that illusion by using the brush stroke to indicate the direction of the rain coming down out of this cloud. And so again, these are really great. Just instead of sitting there with a pencil and trying to, you know, create the illusion and struggle with it, again, we can much more quickly get the illusion that we want. And so again, it's a time saver. We want to save ourselves a little bit of time, so we can just get it done much more quickly, instead of, you know, spinning our wheels. I mean, if there's better, more efficient ways of doing something, do it. You know, be efficient. Why wouldn't you want to do that? More time to work on, you know, more drawings, more paintings, what have you. You know, that you can put, you know, and decorate the house with, or whatever your thing is, or you know, maybe to sell to a client, or what have you. Again, we're getting enough information here that we're starting to get something that's beginning to approximate, just on a basic way. There's lots of information we have not put in here yet, but we've got just enough where we're starting to have, you know, it's starting to look a little bit like there's enough of relationships where there's a relationship between this and the reference. We start to go, okay, I can start to see the clouds are emerging. And sometimes that takes a while. We've been drawing on this for almost 2 hours, and we're just barely getting to the place where we've got stuff starting to happen. It's all about those basic relationships. And for me, this is one of the most exciting parts of the drawing. The more we go on here, the more we're going to have to start playing edge games. And what I mean by that is, like, right here there's these lighter edges, and this is, and I've kind of made them more distinct. There's some light edges along these dark clouds. So there's a part where the dark cloud is lighter than the blue sky behind it. And we're going to need some of that, otherwise it'll flatten out. Without these little soft edges, that whole sky would just go flat. So as we're getting to the point where now we've got enough information in here where, again, we're going to start playing some edge games to help things, you know, seem like they're jumping more than the values actually are, because we're paying attention to stuff like where the sky meets the dark clouds. There's actually a lighter edge that helps separate them, so they're more defined, that separation. And then there's going to be, like, this dark cloud I'm putting in here is fairly dark against the light of the cloud behind it. That creates the edge. So it's going to have some contrast, or some pop, as some people like to call it. It's going to jump. It's going to have it's going to catch our eyes slightly. And again, we're going to come in here just a little bit and start to bring in some of these values of these clouds. And again, some of these clouds is very important. Again, so I haven't talked a little bit for a while about the way I'm looking at this. I'm still keeping my eye very soft. As I'm keeping my eye soft, I am looking, you know, I'm trying to look at the bigger picture. Again, the biggest thing is when we start to get to this point, we start to our inclination is to start to focus on all the different areas. We're not there yet, not even close. So, like I've told people in my classes, 90-95% of the time you're taking your eyes out of focus and you're keeping a very soft eye while you're drawing, so you can see the relationships. It's all about the relationships. If the relationships aren't there, the drawing won't have any power. The drawing won't look anything like because even, again, this is a caricature. We need some of the basic contrast. We need some of the basic light to dark. We need some of the basic shape relationships in order for this to, there's a term we use called read. And what we mean by that is so we can see what's going on, so we understand what it looks like. We're going to need some of that. And if I'm not if I'm not taking my eye out of focus, if I'm not doing my best to try to, again, I've got some weird thing happening there with the paper, and again, that happens, and I'm just taking note of it. I'm probably also using some very colorful language in my brain right now because I'm not excited about that by any stretch of the imagination. But hopefully you're a lot more zen about this than I am. And you're just, doing your deep breathing right about now. That always helps. That really does help. And at this point, we want all the... Now again, when I'm in the clouds, I'm trying to use... I'm using random marks. I'm trying to, instead of trying to do every, like sometimes we do clouds, we try to make all these little curlicues and every little this and that. And despite doing every little curlicue and stuff like that and trying to do this and that, it doesn't look like the cloud. And so what I'm doing instead is I'm looking for the general shapes, and I'm keeping my hand really loose because I want to have, dare I use the term, happy accidents. That's probably not the term I would use. The term I'd use instead is that we want some random shapes. And so if we can get some random shapes that truly are random, that have a feeling like they're random, that it will start to look more like a cloud. If we focus on every little new bump and nuance, it'll start to look like the fur on a poodle or something like that, and that's probably not what we want on this thing. And so again, we're just trying to bring some of the randomness of nature is what we're really trying to do with that. This is the first time I picked up the Kleenex. Again, I like the Kleenex because it's really soft, and I'll make a little stump with it, fold it over, sometimes I'll twist it a little bit. And again, I can start to get in here a little bit more with this tissue, and again, it can be really great for playing with edges. And that's where we're at. We're really trying to get a feel for these edges. As far as that goes. And we're still trying to get rid of some of the texture. Like so. I'm going to pull some of this down for that rain cloud, so we're just going to pull. So again, I'm trying to create illusions just by the way I'm blending even becomes very important. And this is this cute little rain cloud coming across here. And this is a little north of Nampa. For those that know Idaho, this is just north of Nampa on the, I think it's on McMillan. So it's before you jump back onto Ustick. But again, there's some beautiful country out there. It's a shame that there's a lot of building going on right now, and it's a shame because we're going to be losing a lot of these open, expanses of land where we can see these beautiful skies. There's something just so wonderful about looking across this landscape full of beautiful skies. As an artist, it just makes your soul just kind of renew itself, and there's an excitement about watching these beautiful clouds after a storm. Of course, this is, I guess, a storm in the background, but still, just so wonderful to see things like that. Nature in all its glory, and now this is why people do landscapes. This is why people have painted them and been inspired by them for generations, is because they are just so amazing. And the artist wants to share that with, the viewer, that this is a spectacular moment in time, a moment that will never, repeat itself again. There may be moments that are similar, but this particular moment in time is finite. And as an artist, you've captured it, so that you can, look back and let it lift your soul and these different things. And this is what we do as artists. We are trying to inspire. We are trying to instruct. We're trying to share. We're trying to give to people an insight, a moment in time that made us stop, and take a break from our busy lives for just a moment, and remember to remember things like beauty, and to remember things like awe-inspiring moments, and not to be too poetic about it, but as an artist, I certainly believe that there are moments and there are times where you can, just a moment like this, to stop and watch a sky like this for 5-10 minutes can really alter our perspective on life, can really, change us as individuals. And, as we remember that everything like this is a gift. It's a wonderful, extraordinary gift that we have to be able to live in a place where we have these and I'm born and raised in the West, in the Western United States, and to have access to places like this is very, very important to me as an artist. And it's a sense of feeling a connection to the land. And it makes me understand why people want to farm, why people want to be, have their life connected to something. And I know that can sound very idealized, because I also have known and, people that farm, and that's, that sounds very idyllic, because, there's a lot of, hard realities if you're going to farm and do these different things and work with the land that's got the some of the realities creep in. But we're not talking about crop rates or harvest rates or any of that for right now. We're just thinking, man, isn't it wonderful to be alive as a human being and be able to witness something this spectacular, this beautiful. It makes it all worth it. It makes it all worthwhile. And that's that it's about. It's a celebration of life. It's a celebration of being alive. It's a celebration of something that runs deeper, that our ancestors, that your family members, that your great 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 grandparents and their great great grandparents, and throughout your family probably would most likely have had moments where they looked on skies like these and thought, man, that's beautiful. That's amazing. Look at how incredible that is. There might also have been some awe and, oh my goodness, and we better get some stuff in, and here comes the rain. But this was after the rain had passed and the rain has gone on to another area. I have to believe that there are people that would be captivated by it, just like I am captivated by it. And it's what makes creating art. It's what makes creating drawings and being creative so wonderful, is that I have a chance to share this with people. That they can hopefully maybe feel some of the same, feel the same way that I do about this. That they can see this and go, man, I see what you're talking about. That is pretty incredible stuff. That is something that would inspire me, and that is something I'd like to, experience more. And it's why people, live in the country as opposed to cities. Cities have a lot of, things you can do, but I'll tell you what, this is just a few minutes of this is just as exciting as being in, the best club out there, or whatever, the best night, hot spot or thing of the nightlife or whatever. I still find it hard to hold a candle to a moment like this. And again, this was just north of Nampa, Idaho, on the farmland, looking looking back towards the Boise Mountains. And so it's moments like this that remind me why I'm an artist. It's moments like this that remind me why I do what I do. If ever I forget, all it takes is jumping in the car and going for a quick drive and pulling out the paints and painting these beautiful locations, these beautiful areas. It all makes sense. It all comes into focus. It's what it's all about. Why wouldn't it be? Right? So I hope as we're doing this and you're listening to me drone on and on, that maybe you'll understand kind of what I'm getting at. Maybe even a kindred spirit out there going, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I feel the same way sometimes. I know what that's like. That's exactly, Now there's certain decisions I probably should let you know about. Again, just like I was talking about the edges, that's those were left there for a reason. Those edges. There's so these mountains on this thing, they dip off as they go outside the page, but I brought them up, and that's a compositional decision. So when you're doing mountains, you really want the mountain to be coming down as it hits the edge, because if you're not careful, it'll draw the eye right off with it. And so most times you'll have the mountain end going up a little bit or straight or something, as opposed to going down. And so again, that's a pure compositional idea, pure composition for the reason that we're doing that. And we'll do a lot of things like that in the landscape. I'm just trying to clean up this edge. So sometimes we'll blend, and then other times we'll come back, and then we clarify. And that's what I was doing there. I was clarifying that edge. And now I think now this will blend it, but I'm also going to use this as a drawing tool to try to clarify this edge, because it's a dark edge. Now I could clarify it by pulling that out and then maybe going back in and darkening it up. And I still might do that, but right now I think this might be, a better idea as far as this goes, to get that to have that do that. This rain pushes over a little bit more, so I need to bring the darks over. So I want some of that. Like so. Okay. All right. Now we have the clouds in here go a little darker. So we're going to darken those down. I hope we're starting to see that we're getting a little bit of the relationships that are happening here in this scene are starting to come together. So be patient, I guess. Again, we've worked on this now for probably going close to 2 hours or 2.5 hours, and we're just barely getting it to where it's starting to read. And it's because, again, I'm still taking my eyes out of focus. I'm still looking at the basic shapes. I'm still, I'm doing all that stuff. I'm using a soft eye. I'm trying to use that soft eye to keep chunks. So we're not thinking of little tiny stuff with the clouds just yet. We're still trying to look for families and volumes, as we like to say. We don't want to get too distracted by stuff that doesn't matter. We're looking for the big relationships. And so there are families of shapes that begin to merge as you take your eyes out of focus. They're going to help our drawing just be more interesting as far as that goes. So again, we're going to keep looking at this, keep looking at this. Take our eyes out of focus. Again, we're going to go ahead and do that. We're going to get our little tissue paper here again, and we're going to begin to... Now there's parts of this that are just going to, again, start to come into focus. So by doing this, this is starting to make more sense. Like before, it was just a bunch of gobbledygook. It is very, very confusing. But again, once we start getting these patterns in, these patterns are going to start to make more sense. And again, that's just part of the drawing process, is that, you know, the more we start to get the big shapes that are the correct value and close to the right shape, then the whole image will start to begin to come into focus. All of a sudden we're able to interpret what we're looking at. And we're like, oh yeah, now I see what that is. Because, you know, so we start off again with, it can seem very abstract. And I've talked to people, so I have, you know, a degree in, you know, I had minors in art history when I was in college and things. And so we would study the different movements, and I always found it fascinating that the photorealists like Richard Estes and Chuck Close and some of the other photorealists were actually inspired by the abstract expressionists, and they were trying to show the abstraction of reality. And the idea being that is if you know, if we zoomed in on this, we'd start to see the texture. It would break up the values, and it would start to look like an abstraction. It wouldn't look like that image anymore. It would just look, you know, like an abstract image. And so that's what would happen with those photorealists. They were doing these huge, huge paintings, you know, 20 by 40 feet, you know, some were 30 feet by 60 feet. I mean, huge stuff. They weren't doing trompe-l'oeil. They were doing, you know, trompe-l'oeil was a different thing, where that's called fool the eye, and with that stuff you're making the objects the exact same size that they actually are. So that way it creates an illusion that you're actually seeing the object. Whereas these guys were taking objects and just blowing them up huge. And so if you were standing in front of the painting, the skin texture, which was painted, you know, began to fracture and looked like stucco. Or looked like, you know, pebbles on the beach or sand or something like that. You couldn't even see the portrait that was being painted. All you could see was all these amounts of abstract shapes and little, you know, flourishes and these different things. And then if you got back 30 feet, or you could see the image, and if you got back 50 feet, all of a sudden you could tell what it is that you were actually looking at. And that's what the photorealists were really interested in. They were interested in the abstraction of reality. Some of that same stuff is happening here. What seemed to be very abstract is suddenly starting to come into focus. It's suddenly starting to make sense because of the fact that we've got enough of the relationships established. If the relationships aren't established correctly, it would just look again like an abstract mess. Just a bunch of dancing shapes on a page, as opposed to clouds and things like that. And so this illusion that we're creating can sometimes be very, that's what I'm looking for. It can be not just fleeting, but it can be very easily broken. And again, what's going to make the object have a relationship is the basic shapes, the basic values. So that's why I continue to talk about that soft eye, is because if we don't have it, we won't have the underlying relationship, and then it just will start to fracture into lots of little checks and dots and, you know, and just shapes that don't really have any relation one to the other. And then it will look like just an abstraction, and it will no longer look like an image that's trying to depict a particular scene. So that's something we want to keep in mind as we are drawing. this idea that, you know, these objects do have and should have a particular relationship one to the other. And again, hopefully we're starting to see that happen in this scene. Now again, there's some things that that have been changed just because, well, just because they have. There's others that have been changed because some of that randomness has changed things a little bit. And as long as it's not getting in the way of the composition or resting in a place that's going to, you know, distract my eye and make me think it's something that it's not, or that it's not creating a tension point that's just not helping. As long as it's not doing that, I'll leave it. If it's having a problem, then I'll change it. All right. So again, I'm starting to put some other values in here, and again, we're starting to lose it. It's starting to feel abstract again because we don't have all the relationships in the right place, in the right way, doing the right things, and all that sort of stuff. And I understand that. So there's parts of this times with our drawing, and people will talk about this sometimes, that there's times when you're bringing the drawing or painting to life. There's other times you're killing it. Or perhaps a better way to say that is there's certain times where you're obscuring it, and there's other times where it's being clarified. There's some places right now where I'm obscuring it. It is not being clarified, it's being obscured, but I understand that I'm going to have to come back and clarify it. So again, the reason I'm obscuring it is to try to get some of the relationships of the values and to knock down those lights. The whites of the clouds, but the whites of the clouds no longer look white because now they don't have dark enough values around them to make sense of what should be happening or what is happening or what's supposed to be happening on this drawing. And that's all right. I could bring that back in, and we're going to. But that's the idea, is that right now we're kind of breaking stuff down. We're actually destroying stuff. But then we're going to come back in, and then we're going to build stuff back up. But again, we have just enough of this information where we can, you know, we're seeing it come together over through here. And what I'm going to do, the way we're going to clarify it, is, you know, this might be the correct value, though I believe it's a little dark, and we might have to come over here and perhaps, and again, I haven't even used those other erasers. I've been using mostly the kneaded eraser, so that's the whole thing about, well, I'll use something if I have to, but, you know, I'll just keep it around just in case I need it. So, again, maybe that needs to be a little bit lighter, maybe something like that. But again, you know, we're not to that point. But for the biggest part, the blue sky isn't dark enough in a lot of these areas. The blue sky is going to go darker, and I'm going to get that anchored and darkened enough before I start pulling out the lights in the sky. There's also some areas, and I'll actually probably start using these guys because on this flatter paper, they can give some really nice rich darks. But there's parts in this dark clouds that are not dark enough. And so we'd want some nice rich, you know, almost blacks, almost as dark as we can go. Not quite, but close. And so, and same thing with the trees. There's some trees here that should be a little darker. But this will come in here. And again, this will give some very nice dark velvety blacks when we're using this. So this is what's nice, because it's harder, it gets deeper into the texture of the paper, because, you know, charcoal's pretty soft, so usually, you know, it rides on top of the paper. That's why there's normally more texture in your charcoal drawings, because of the fact that charcoal's so soft, it's riding on top of the paper, revealing its texture. Whereas this is hard enough that it actually gets down into the texture, fills in those white little gaps, and because it's getting rid of the little white specks, that's the texture of the paper. Not only does the image seem more uniform, but the darks get richer, and so that's kind of nice. Give you a little more punch. And there are certainly times where you're going to want that little bit of contrast to bring the drawing up a bit. Okay. Let's see. I think there's a couple places through here. Again, just a little bit more dark maybe in a couple places. Keep it soft. Now this is also the H that I'm using for these 1710s. And I don't know if they're I'm finding these harder and harder to find, and I don't know if they're in higher demand because these are being used by a lot by some really great folks like Watts Atelier, teaches, to use this, and of course Proco, uses this, and there's probably some other people as well teaching, people to use these Conte pencils, or I don't know what, but it seems like I'm having a harder time finding some of these, and they're you have to kind of search for them anyways. But this is the H, so I don't think those other two folks. No, it's a B, pardon me. But I think most of the other folks are using two Bs and stuff like that. I have the H and the B, and it just gives you a little bit more range of value, which again is nice, to have a little more value when you're drawing. So that can be really nice. I'm going to see if I have some areas here that got, because I was blending this area out. Let's see. Yeah, okay, so there is some whites that I can use, which is great because we need a little more contrast. And so there were some of this that got dirtied up just a bit, which is fine for it could be our light middle values. And for these, for these clouds, it can help our clouds to have a little more, a little more punch, a little bit more shape, a little more contrast, all this good stuff. And again, as this cloud is really what we're anchoring everything on. This cloud has to really sort of read, or we have to really, make it look good. Otherwise, our drawing probably won't work near as much without this cloud really, So there's certain things in a drawing or a painting that we'll be like, yeah, we've got to, we can't miss it. We got to nail that down. That's got to be. We got to be hitting all cylinders. There's a NASCAR, analogy or whatever. For those, I don't really watch NASCAR, but firing on all cylinders. My dad used to work on cars, so he'd say that a lot. It's got to be firing on all cylinders. So we need that. We need this to really work. If it doesn't work, the whole drawing will suffer. Because this is our focal point, but it's not just that; it's the highest value in our key. So, keying in the values, what's the lightest light, what's the darkest dark. This is our lightest light in here, and then in our darkest darks are going to probably be the trees, but there's parts of these clouds that get pretty deep too. And again, I can use this to get in there. Fill in some of the texture. I think I'm going to use an H. Yeah, the H will just you have to build it up a little bit more. It takes a little bit more time to do it. But I'm going to use it to pull this together because you probably can't see it because it's a little softer on the camera. So it may look like this is more uniform than what it is. But where I'm seeing it, it looks very splotchy. And so we're going to use this pencil to pull this together by first it's gonna go ahead and fill in some of the texture, but it's also gonna so some of these lights fracture this up, divides it up. There's parts where they become important and the edges do need to be there. There's other parts where it needs to kind of just bleed together into sort of some uniform sort of thing. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to play with edges. These are edge games. And this is where we're at on this drawing, where we really need to start thinking of the edges. We still need to start looking at how things come together. And that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to bring some things together that need to be, and to get rid of some of the splotchiness, to bring back some form. That would be the best way of saying it, because it is all about form. This is just like anything else. These clouds have a form. They're they're kind of billowy, sort of these amorphic, 3D sorts of shapes, and like cotton balls almost. Which these aren't really spherical. These are more sort of like these long, connecting cigar shapes, or maybe even better are these mounted clothscapes almost. If you put a a blanket or something down on a table and mounted it up, put a light source on it, so you're going to have these sort of these the undersides and sides of these clouds that are starting to we're starting to see the form of these undulating three-dimensional shapes extending like little fingers across the sky. And so we want to be we're looking for the bottom side, the side. Now I can't see the top side of these clouds because they're above my head, so I'm either seeing the underside or a little bit of the side. But we're trying to, and so this may not seem like I've done a whole lot on the camera, but in real life, where I am right now, this is really starting to unify this. It's making it look a whole lot more like an integrated drawing, whereas before it was just a splotchy mess. And so this is what we're doing. This is what we're after. All right, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to keep on doing this. All right, and we're going to keep working on this. We're going to look for these edges. These edges, again, that I started are going to have to change and shift a little bit. These edges of the sky, again, are going to have to shift and change a little bit. But we're really starting to get to where we have, something that's starting to come together that looks a bit like this sky. All right. So we're going to go ahead and, again, we're going to start to use this to protect the paper. I'm going to be working up in here, and so I'm not dragging my hand across the drawing. We'll go ahead and use that. And you also got to be careful that you don't take way too much time getting into too much little stuff that doesn't really make as much sense, or superfluous details that don't matter or anything like that. We want to be careful that we're trying to make this as quick as we can without going nuts on, again, things that don't matter as much as far as that goes. But we're going to be dealing with smaller stuff now, a little more drawing. We've got enough tone everywhere where now we can do some of this. Now I'm using the kneaded eraser because the kneaded eraser is also a drawing tool. So I'm going to start to draw some things. And this is the thing about charcoal, and even graphite, of course, any sort of medium, is there's a point where you can start to develop it with an eraser and make it even much more, just a much better drawing, knock it up to another level. And that's what we can start to do with this eraser. To make it, a better drawing than what it would be without using the eraser. So again, we're going to start looking at smaller groupings of clouds and stuff like that. As we are, I'm going to also get into this now. I've got a small, I've got this Conte pencil, and with this Conte pencil we're gonna, again, we can get in and keep it a little crisper on the edges because it's not as soft as the charcoal, so it can really help us to get into some places that would be a little harder to otherwise. Yeah, so let's go ahead and we're gonna make an edge there's a little darker cloud that we're going to come in here and start to define. It's actually a couple, it's probably 3 or 4 or 6 different clouds all sort of merged together. So it's, again, it's a family of clouds, if you will, as opposed to just one particular cloud. Again, I'm going to keep my eyes soft so we don't get too distracted by, again, little stuff that isn't as important as other stuff. All that technical art speak. But we really are just trying to, see the families a little more clearly. We're trying to, keep the information clean and clear as much as possible. And we're gonna start to just get a little more information. So, and it's these smaller relationships of the clouds that start to, the edges. Again, this is we're just going to really sort of go back to playing some of these edges, and they're going to be very important for what we're trying to do. And you'll see the more we like, I'm going to be working this area a little bit. The more I get in here, and again, if I do it correctly, these relationships will start to emerge with the clouds, and it'll be a nice, it'll start to come alive, this wonderful cloudscape, as we call them. And again, pretty powerful stuff, pretty exciting stuff. It's what originally drew me to this scene, was this, these clouds and a spectacular sky. And I'm just using my kneaded eraser, and I'm carving away. I should probably lean this to make sure I'm not blocking you from seeing kind of what I'm up to. That would be unfortunate. There's a part where we've got this dark against the sky, and this part of the cloud is darker, and the blue sky is a little lighter. And so again, we're going to start to try to make sure we can start to separate, where does the cloud start, this dark cloud, and where does the sky start. And right now, it's a little unclear, and so we come up here to this edge, and we're going to lighten a little bit of where the sky is hitting that darker cloud just a bit. We're going to come in here and take out some of that texture, which is going to help. So now this is darker and this is lighter, and that's what we need. We need just a little bit more clarity. This happens again where we have some of the sky down here, and we have the clouds over here, and one's supposed to be lighter and the other is supposed to be darker. And again, we need to make sure that that is clear. And so I'm going to come in here, and I may have to use my little eraser to lighten parts of the sky through here just a bit. So again, the sky is lighter and the dark clouds next to it are darker. And so again, this is where we're the relationships are, that are going to help again give us more clarity, really are important. Again, sorry, I've got this mic on my shirt, new equipment, and again, I went to scratch my, the top of my clavicle over here, and I'm sure you can probably hear it in the mic, way too clear. So I apologize for that. So again, trying to make the dark clouds that are darker than the sky. Again, this is where the rubber meets the road, is, again, that old analogy about cars, that we want to be clear. We want to have, we want it to be able to go, okay, that's dark cloud value. Oh, that's the sky. Oh, look, that's something lighter. That's a little lighter cloud and stuff like that. And just getting these families to separate a little bit more, they'll have, again, more clarity. Because we don't have color along with value, we're really having to take our time and focus in on the relationships, so that, again, we can get this to work. All right. Again, we're going to come back into this cloud. And again, I'm using my eraser as a drawing tool. There's a part of the side of this cloud that's a little slightly darker. That was a little too dark. I want something that was light, so that's why I used, if I used the stumps, it'd probably be just a little bit too dark. And so I used what was left on the tissue, because a lot of it's the vine charcoal that's a little lighter. There we go. And again, we can come in here and start to try to clarify some of these different families of value. We can even get, see, I've got, these are also just like this guy. This is a retractable eraser. And again, you can come in here with these for little details like clouds and stuff, and you can really start to try to get some nice subtlety with the eraser, as far as that goes and stuff. And it can just be just a little more nuance. Again, if I'm doing portraits and stuff like that, it can be just a really great tool. Again, I'm going to probably bring in some of this, and we're going to go ahead and bring some of this little charcoal maybe over into here, just a little bit. And then we're going to, come back in here with this tool just in a couple places, again, to get a little more value in this, a little more definition, as some people might use that term. And we're just trying to get the form shadows on this cloud to start to feel like this puffy cumulus cloud. Again, I can use the stumps to draw with. Just got to make sure you don't have too dark on there. So I was taking some of the dark stuff off. And again, you can use this for very light values, like the light values in this cloud. And again, it can just give it just some nice subtlety. So we know this cloud isn't all the same, but that it actually has some different values up here, and are just going to make this really nice. And again, we're going to get some of the subtlety back and all this sort of stuff. And who wouldn't want some of that? That was a little too strong, some of that texture. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can wipe some of it off with this. Again, we're getting a little more aggressive here. Obviously, I'm not using shop tools or anything like that, but still, we are getting a little bit more aggressive in here. We don't have time to put this off any longer. We want to get this thing done. So I'm going to go ahead and, again, start to bring this in, break these shapes up. So again, we're going to continue to lay these shapes in. As far as that goes, lay these shapes in, continue to lay the shapes in. It's a little darker, this little bit of cloud, underside of this cloud, just slightly darker. So we do want that. We're going to come in here and we'll see if we can, again, get this to smooth out, take out some of the texture. It's also going to get a little bit darker because I'm using a stump, but I think I want that, so we're going to go ahead and, again, only on the downstroke while I'm using the stump. And again, the more uniform this is, because it's supposed to be a real easy transition through this sky. And again, we don't want to be distracted by the texture, and so we're continuing to try to get this to be more uniform. With charcoal, it's a lot harder to make value gradations in as clean a way as you can with graphite. It takes a lot more time, it takes a lot more layering, but even then, even with the best type of, at least on this paper, the rougher papers are easier with charcoal. The smoother papers, you have to get in here with stumps and stuff like that. So I don't mean it as a blanket statement, but so that's why we keep layering, is to try to get the gradations. Again, we're using the stumps, we're using the other tools, we go back in the areas we want darker, and then we're going to come in here and see if we can polish this out, as some people might call it. Try to see if we can get this a little more uniform. I like the value where it's at. I think it's working that way. I just want a little bit more, just a little bit nicer uniformity to the sky. This is probably a little dark, so I'm going to come in here and I'm going to get pretty aggressive with wiping at that a little bit. And I think that will help. And it's just going to lighten it by maybe half a step of value, if that much. It's really going to mostly be getting rid of the texture that's in there. I'm using the tissue, and I wish I had one of my, they have a drawing brush and you got to be careful with those. So I'm going to just use this very, very gently and brush that stuff off the drawing, so I can see the drawing that's nice and clean now, and continue to go back in here. So and go ahead and get in here a little bit more. As far as that goes, keep these nice and soft. Again, they're supposed to be, a nice little cumulus cloud, nice and puffy, and all that good stuff. And that's what we want. And again, we're starting to get some of this nice stuff happening, like what we've got going over here in the photograph. Again, this isn't the exact. We're not looking for exact. This isn't. This is a caricature, so it's. We're looking for close. Now that's close. Okay, but we're really just yeah, that kind of looks like that scene there. Until you start to scrutinize and go, well, okay, that's a little different. That's a little different. That's a little different. But in general, you're like, that has a real feel for it. That feels like that same idea, and that's all we're looking for. And so it's just enough that people can go, yeah, I get it now. I see what you're doing, and it's nice and all that good stuff. So I'm gonna get in here, get a little more aggressive with this as I'm blending. Going to try to make this a little more uniform as well. Polish this out just a bit. I think we can, soften some of what's happening up there. See, when I first did it, and erased it, it was a little too strong, and now we're just, softening it down just a bit, making it integrate, as people might like to say. Then we could come in here. Now the interesting thing when we do this is that the darks are going to make the lights look lighter. So as I go in here, I start asking myself, well, which is lighter, the sky or the clouds? There's a couple places where mostly the sky is darker, but there's a couple places where it's not. And again, that's the place where we really have to ask ourselves, which way do we want to push it? Do we want to push it darker than the clouds, or do we want to go lighter than the clouds? There's a term that I've only used in the class every so often. I'm not as big a user of it as, because it's basically, a concept that, the Western world adopted, and it's an idea or a concept that was already there. So I'm like, I don't feel near as compelled to use it as much. But some people like to throw around notan or natan, or I've heard people say different ways, whether it's notan or natan. I don't know that it makes a big difference to me. But the idea of that concept is it's the way that you organize the lights and the darks, and it's something from the Orient, and people talk about the yin and yang symbol and notan and different things like that. And as I understand it, because again I'm not an expert, but I've heard enough of it that it was inspired as I understand it, it's actually a philosophy used again in design, and it's probably in the arts as well. But I haven't, I'm not, again, I've heard people talk about it, and I'm just like, well, that's why, that concept was already here. It just, it wasn't, they weren't using that word, but they were certainly using the concept. And so, whenever people have been drawing, whether it be a Western tradition or an Eastern tradition or somewhere in between, there's a lot of concepts that were used, but they may have been used differently. So certainly the Japanese prints that were flooding the markets in Paris and were really inspired the impressionists because of this new way of thinking. They were using these ideas and concepts differently than the Western traditions had said they should be done, and it was a refreshing change from what was being taught, and very, very beautiful, despite that it seemed to go against some of the traditions. And I'll say traditions because it's not the teachings; it's the way that they were using it in their particular culture, and so it seemed new, and it was because of the usage. So it was new, but it was the way they were applying it, rather than the core concept of shape and shadow and all these things. Those were certainly around. They'd been around ever since people started making marks and putting other marks next to them, and making shapes and putting other shapes next to those. And so these weren't new concepts, but the way they were being used was different. And so it's interesting stuff. But notan meaning one is whether you're going to let the values and the local value rule the drawing, or you're going to change and let the basic masses or the local value start to rule. So there's times, so when I started this, because I was talking about this shadow right here that's actually darker here than it is here, and it's actually the shadow color, and I wanted to, and all that means is I have to decide: am I going to use the form where the form says that should be darker, or am I going to say, well, I'm going to lighten it, because if I lighten it, that way the sky will look darker and the white will look lighter, and it's this relationship thing. It's all about how these things relate one to the other, and you're constantly doing that. Am I gonna go ahead? The local value meaning that blue is a certain value, and this cloud, this light cloud, is a certain value. And if you try to go, look, I don't want it to cross over. I need the lights to look lighter, the light stuff look light, and the dark stuff look dark. In form shadows, sometimes objects will cross and start to, things that are light will share the same darks as the same values, and there's times when that's fine. There's other times, like this sky, where it may not be fine. It may start to confuse the viewer, and so that's part of that. When I talked about redesign on this, that's part of that redesign element where we're like, okay, how are we going to change this? Are we going to keep it exactly how it is? The answer to that is almost never do you ever do that. And so you're constantly changing things. You're constantly varying stuff, and and this is going to be one of them where we're going to change it so that it's more clear. We do that all the time with our artwork. We do that all the time to help things have more clarity, and we want that. That's going to help the object to look like oh, those are clouds, instead of, what is that? Is that, is that yarn or some sort of strange torn paper overlapping one another? What is that thing? I don't know. We want to clarify it, so that's what we're trying to do. Again, we're trying to clarify all these basic areas so that they will have a relationship, and that they will look more accurate because of the relationship that they have one with the other. Like so. Okay. So let's try to make this shape over here a little bit more irregular. Trying to break it up a little bit as I'm drawing. And so again, there's times where I want the shapes to be a little more different, so that they look more interesting or more organic. Or in nature, there's a wonderful variation of the shapes that nature gives us, and it's amazing how there's a wonderful variation in nature, and it's something that as the artist we have to capture, even though we're not used to, usually if we make things too different, like if we have our heart rate is different and irregular, we're in a lot of trouble. We like consistency, we like order in our lives, some sort of order. Things that are too chaotic can stress us out and cause us all kinds of physiological issues, because of the fact that we like things to have a certain type of dependability, order, the absence of chaos. And so when we draw, we'll naturally start to make things more ordered. And something like these shapes are not, there's an underlying rhythm, but that's different from order. If we start making the same shape, the same length, and the same bump, and the same nook, and the same undulation everywhere, it's going to start to be a little more boring. It's not going to have some of this wonderful variation that nature has given to us. So we're constantly trying to reestablish and build back into our drawings the wonderful variations that nature gives to us through the just in the world around us. Try not to be distracted. There's a little bit of light coming through the window that's dancing right through here, and hopefully, and I figure this is probably being picked up on this camera, and we're going to try not to be distracted by it. It looks really cool. I wish I was doing that, but that's always, whenever you shine like a little bit of light, kind of sparkles across your image. It always makes the image really fascinating. And there's times you're like, man, I wish I could do that by my, I could do that stuff. I remember doing some paintings like that when I was, in college. I was like, yeah, I want to look like there's light coming in through a window and just, catching across the surface of this painting. It's hard to do, but man, when you do it, you're like, man, that's cool. I have an artist friend that has done that a lot, where he's, again, painted things that look like a little bit of light is bouncing on the painting through a window or something, and they're just wonderful. They look alive, and they seem to sparkle and to shimmer from some sort of outside light source. Those are really fun. Difficult to pull off, because everything essentially has to kind of seem darker, so that bit of light seems even lighter, and it's a hard illusion to create. But when you do, it's a whole lot of fun. So again, I think we're starting to see that this is, again, starting to come together as far as that goes. So again, we're just bringing in some of these edges just very lightly, just very gently, and sometimes a quarter step of value is all that it takes to make something more clear, and to give something some depth, and to give something some life, and all that wonderful stuff that we see in nature. And again, we've done this enough, we've polished this enough, and we've got enough of these little subtleties that, and it's all about what I leave and what I get rid of. So I'm darkening some parts of this, but there's some wispy little clouds that are just slightly lighter, just barely coming across here, and I'm leaving those alone so that they shimmer just a little bit, and that's where it gets really fun. That's where for me, that's where the magic is really beginning to happen. Starting to have some stuff like that on this drawing come to life. Again, I'm going to go ahead and try to, soften that a little bit. So we already got the basic stuff, and now we're dealing with the, the individual stuff, and we start asking ourselves, is this dark enough against the sky? Does it? And we're actually going to come in here a little bit, I think, and try to see if we can clean. The edges just need to be a little bit clear, and so I'm going to come along the edge with this stump, and it'll soften the edge, but it'll also clean it up a little bit. It'll clarify it, and that's what we want. We want just a little bit clearer edge on some of this. And that's, again, that's what we want. So, there we go. And it's a subtle thing, and it may even be lost in the camera, but it's not lost on the picture. The picture, I couldn't even see what's happening until I went over it with this, and it clarified it at the edges just a little bit, and then suddenly I go, oh yeah, that's what's happening. I can now see what's there. Now this is almost the same value as that dark cloud. It needs to be just a tiny bit lighter. So I'm going to take this tissue, and again, remember, this is like an eraser. It will lighten stuff just very softly. And so instead of grabbing an eraser and making this, just all blotchy and everything, I'm just going to wipe just a little bit of it away. And then I'm going to come in here with this darker edge and come back in there. Again, just a little bit. Just a little bit more. Again, we're just trying to clarify these edges, and I brought this into the picture because we're trying to block some of that sparkling light that's happening. Trying to keep that from. It only happens through these honeycomb blinds when it's a certain time in the evening. And it being summer, it's like 7 o'clock, but that's when it's just the right angle to be piercing through there, make it a mess. Now there's much more subtlety in these clouds that we're just not going to take the time to define. That would be something where I could spend another 8 hours on this thing, just trying to get all the subtlety of all the half tones and things like that in these clouds that really, again, would take this to just another level. But we're not doing that here. We're just going to try to get just enough where we go, yeah, that looks cloud-like. Yeah, that looks like these dark storm clouds, and those are a little lighter, and the clouds have, you know, this is a ridge line of one cloud, and this is another cloud behind it, and so we have the darker ridge against the lighter ridge. There's stuff like that going on here that's very, very soft and a little bit lost in this reference. You know, this is kind of a splotchy print, and so I can't even see some of it. And thank goodness, because again, we don't want to take, again, we're already going on probably 4 hours on this thing. We don't need more time. But we can, hopefully you can see that, you know, this is where everything's starting to come to life. This is where, you know, this is really starting to happen. This is how this cloudscape is starting to read, you know, and as these clouds reaching across the sky, you know, into here. And, you know, again, just so much fun. So spectacular, so, you know, so amazing. I mean, that's what this is all about. And again, I've got just enough. I was going to use some paper towel and pull that out of the way. The light was dancing across there again, so that's my that'll work to block the light. We're just going to go ahead and again try to blend this just a little bit, so we can pull this together, integrate some of the scene. Where did that? Again, I like these because these can, you know, really help for. They're a little easier to make value with these than the charcoal pencils are, just because they are a little bit harder. And I could do this with the charcoal pencils as well. It's just I'd have to go over a few more times. And in fact, in case you don't have them, let's go back to, let's see, one of these guys, which I think is a hard, yeah. So again, I could just, they're just a subtle difference. So I don't want people thinking, oh, I don't have that pencil. I can't do the drawing. Sorry, too bad. Haha. I guess I just got to go and watch Netflix or something. No, it's not. No, we can work with this thing. No worries there. We certainly can. So. All right. Again, let's see if we can get in here and soften this up just a little bit. I like what's happening here. We're getting just enough information where it's starting to make sense. Again, I might have to clarify some edges in here. I can't tell what's going on here, so I'm gonna. There was like this little splotchiness that I don't think is helping. So we're going to make it seem like this is just sky. This is just blue sky. So I'm going to flatten this down. So we're going to have an area where it's not just little wispiness everywhere. And that'll be nice because we need some areas of flat blue. That'll, you know, so we went ahead and softened this and made it sort of a rest area so your eye, you know, if it gets too busy, your eye can kind of be zipping around and it can be very tiresome to your eye. There's this thing is called too much detail. Again, you have to, the really best people that work with detail know when to play it up and when to let it, you know, when to just flatten it out or soften it so that it becomes an area where your eye looks at and you go, ah, isn't that nice? Isn't that refreshing? If it's the same everywhere, it becomes like a noise that's buzzing in your ear, or, you know, that can be very, very distracting and even irritating if you're not careful. And so again, it's this whole, there's all these different concepts we're using as we're drawing and asking ourselves, is that enough? Does that work? Does it do what I want? Is it doing what I want in the way I want? Is it helping or is it detracting? Is it too light? Is it too dark? Is it the right shape or the wrong shape? Is it, getting enough information that looks good? Just all these different things that we're trying to ask ourselves while we're creating these images. And it makes it fun. It makes it challenging. It makes it exciting. It keeps it interesting. That's what drawing is. It's fun, right? At the end of the day, if we didn't have stuff like this, it wouldn't be near as interesting. It wouldn't be near as exciting. It wouldn't be near as fun. So, it's the good stuff. Why wouldn't we want it like that? It's what really makes it exciting. So I'm going to go ahead and just clarify a little bit through here, just a scotch, I think, just a little, meaning just a little bit. I'm going to come through here a little bit. There's a white cloud that breaks through some of this darker cloud, and then it's also lighter, this white cloud before it goes into shadow. And so there's some of this cloud that we're seeing, and then we also have the dark cloud, then we have the blue sky. So again, the blue sky has to be dark enough that looks like white, and I darken the skies a little bit, but now that means that the shadow of this cloud has to go darker too. So again, this is all part of trying to clarify these different families of value, so that they have the proper relationship one to the other as they are coming across the sky here. All right. All right, so we're continuing to put in some of the last little bits here. All right, I think we're pretty close. I think we are pretty close to the end of this thing. So, for those in the class, I want you to go ahead and I'm going to send you the image. For those that might want to try making a sky scene like this, I'm going to include a link to where you can check this out and draw along with it if you like. And so just in case if that's what you want to do, you can go ahead and do that. And again, this is just, and again, I could very easily spend again another 3-4 hours on here. And you might say, well, what would you be doing? Well, I'd go over the whole areas again, making sure that again this is this blue sky is not too splotchy. So I might have to go ahead and decide some of this is going to go and some of this is going to stay and things like that. So that would be a lot of what the work would entail. Coming into here again, defining the clouds. Right now it's just sort of a black nebula, but these actually have overlapping shapes. And in the photograph I'm going to send you, it's much more clear. And I would get in there and I would start to describe some more of those shapes. So it's just doing everything I'm doing now, but going over the drawing again, saying, hey, do I need to clarify something? Do I need to push it back? Do I need to pull out some value? And that would be the that would really take this again to a highly finished level. I think there's enough information here. We can see what the the drawing looks like. We can see a lot of these clouds. It's still soft. It's looking pretty good. It's doing it's creating the look of this sky. And we're to the point where right now again it's getting so clear that every little bit is starting to clarify the drawing more and more and more. That's that's what we want to clarify this, right? So we can again just go ahead and continue to make this better and better and better and better. And again, that's what we want. Like so. Just continuing to again make this just again more and more clear. There's some areas where I'd have to go back in and smooth it out because again the texture is now getting back in the way in a couple places. Like so. But again, we still got some of this is maybe a little bit too bright. That's just a little too bright. So again, I'm just pushing some stuff down. I think this is a little on the bright side, so we're going to push that back just a little bit. Push this back just a little bit. This is how this would progress as we continue to, just softly, just very softly bump it here and nudge it there, and that's where most of the drawing happens. That's where, I take my eyes out of focus and I go, oh well, this is lighter here, and this goes darker here, and this transitions there, and then, and so that's where I get in here and I'd start, burnishing. Well, some people will call it burnisking, but in other words, it's taking out some of the texture, using something to very softly, get rid of some of that texture, push some of this stuff down very gently as far as that goes. Like so, and like so. Something like that. Again, I can come back in here again and again, just continue to layer this. Like I wiped that out and it still was a little patchy. So now I'm coming back in here a third, fourth time. Now it's getting nice and uniform. And that's one thing with charcoal. So, now, not everyone in the class has done a reductive drawing. Reductive drawing is when you take charcoal and you make a ground of a very, very, very flat ground, and then you erase away, and then you continue to develop it. But it starts off with everything being the same value, and then you start racing into it. It takes 3 to 4 to 5 layers to get a nice even coat of charcoal, so that you can then go in there and start to create a reductive drawing. So the same thing's happening here. To get a nice even coating, if you will, I'm having to go over it and over it and over it and over it, and I might have to go over it 5 or 6 or 7 times to get it nice and uniform the way I want. And again, that's where the time really is gonna come into it. That's where, again, we're gonna be putting in a lot of the time is getting everything to be just how I want it. As far as that goes. And so again, through here, I'd probably, I'd burnish this out and then put some more down and burnish it out and put some more down. And each time you do it, it's going to look nicer and nicer and nicer and nicer. And, again, that's where a lot of that time is just going over things and going over things. And again, with charcoal, it's very common. Now, on the darker papers, you don't have to do, pardon me, the darker papers, the rougher papers, you have to do less of that because the charcoal builds up very quickly. So you just work it slightly differently because it is a different material. But, again, you don't get quite the nice, everything becomes really soft many times on that softer paper. With this, we can get some, not on this because this is mostly soft clouds, but on something where you're doing hard and soft edges, it's easier to do that on a little firmer paper with charcoal than it is with softer paper that's got a rougher texture because it just the edges, you don't get quite the variability in the edges, and sometimes that can really be what makes the image is how you vary the edges and the edge work and all that sort of stuff in the drawing and all that. And I'm just adding like these are some of the last little flourishes on this storm cloud here. Again, that's what's fun about this. Again, you got to wait till a certain point where you can start to put the some of the finishing touches, and now we're to that point where we can put some of the finishing touches on here. And again, I think we'll go ahead and then call it done. But there's a couple of things I can tell you. I'm going to grab another tool here really quick because there are some edges, and these lines all start to look like lines, and so we're going to go ahead and break these up a little bit. Use the stump to change the mark, widen them out, soften them down, vary the shape in them. They're just too similar, and again, it won't look natural if they are too similar everywhere. So we have to again make them less similar, a little more random, a little more, and so. All right. Okay, so I think we're going to go ahead and call that done. So again, I went ahead and we got the dark clouds here. We got the sky coming down. I know I just said it's done, but a couple places we're going to go ahead and, there we go, make it just a little softer. So anyway, so we've got dark storm clouds coming down here to this bright cloud. Again, if I wanted to, you know, I could use my H, and again I could come in here, and again I could come around here, around the edge, to reestablish just a little firmness on that edge. You know, that can be, you know, something that, again, part of that thing is going to take so much time. Again, I could work this edge. I'd probably have to work 30 minutes just to get this edge to do what I wanted. But it's basically to make it seem so it's not so, it's still soft, but it's got a soft edge there that's just been blown out. And so I'd come in here and start to try to reestablish, again, just a little bit of an edge, not a hard edge, but a soft edge. Like right here, this is really blown out, and the edge is just completely gone. As opposed to coming in here and go, okay, well we're gonna come in here and recreate just a little bit of that edge. And that's just a little. I don't want to make it a cartoon edge, but I needed a little bit more firmness than what's there. Before, what was there was nothing. It was just a really soft. But now we go, okay, now we've got a little bit of an edge there. And, you know, I've also I softened it a bit. And now I can come back in, again, with a little bit of the eraser. Again, I could use this eraser if I needed to. And we can come back in and, again, just make that edge just a little less, you know, we want a little bit of detail on this, so we're going to go ahead and come in here and something about like that. Okay, so I think, you know, now I just say, okay, that really is done. We're going to go ahead and call this done. So we've got, again, a cute little scene with mountains, distant mountains, and the sky. And this was really about the sky. This wasn't near as much about, you know, this area down here. But go ahead and give this a shot. Again, still some areas in here I'd like to clarify. Again, that's where that 4 hours is. You just continue to, oh, I don't know that I like this. Well, I'm going to change this, and I'll pull that out, put some stuff down, soften it in, pull stuff out, soften it in, check the edge. You know, this is where it really takes the time. But, you know, try to see if you can get some to this point, because we do have some here that seems to have a certain amount of substance. And again, the more you do this, the better you'll get. But again, at least we've been able to create something that, again, starts to look like a sky scene, and then it has some nice values in the sky scene. And give it your best shot. These can be really, really fun. All right, you guys take care. Have a good one. Be more creative. Bye-bye now.